night, while satellites high above the Pacific relay critical targeting data to command centers deep within China. Welcome to Grand Line Media. Thousands of miles away, in the heart of Beijing, an underground military complex hums with activity. Walls lined with digital maps flicker with real-time updates. Warships, missile launch sites, and American bases across the Pacific. A massive display pinpoints the U.S. military's strongest footholds in the region: Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Guam. For a decade, China has been preparing for this moment. The modernization of its military is nearly complete. 395 warships, a rapidly expanding nuclear arsenal, and the world's largest standing army of over 2 million personnel. But to challenge the United States, sheer numbers aren't enough. The Pacific is a chessboard, and the first move must be decisive. The first attack doesn't come with missiles or gunfire. Instead, it begins in silence. Across the Pacific, American radar stations flicker with interference. Military bases lose contact with their satellite uplinks. Financial networks in major U.S. cities experience sudden, unexplained outages. Power grids in key areas report failures. This isn't an accident. China's cyber warfare divisions have spent years embedding themselves into critical U.S. infrastructure. Now, with a single command, they strike. In Washington, confusion spreads as classified networks become compromised. By the time the alarms sound, the damage is already done. Communications are disrupted. Supply chains are momentarily frozen, and the U.S. finds itself momentarily blind in the Pacific. That's when the real war begins. The United States reels from the unprecedented scale of the cyber onslaught. Major cities experience rolling blackouts. Financial markets plunge into disarray as banking systems falter. The Pentagon's communication networks disruptions, complicating immediate military responses. Amidst this turmoil, the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, or the PLARF, China's elite missile division, mobilizes. With 120,000 personnel and thousands of precision-guided missiles at its disposal, it launches a three-pronged assault across the Pacific. The first target, Taiwan. Chinese air bases at Longtian, Zhangzhou, and Huyan deploy squadrons of J-16 fighters, while missile strikes pound Taiwanese military infrastructure. Airfields, command centers, and radar installations are primary targets, aiming to cripple Taiwan's ability to organize an effective defense. Next, China targets U.S. military installations in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. These house nearly 80,000 American troops and serve as launch points for U.S. operations in the region. DF-16 and DF-26 missiles rain down, striking in airfields, naval ports, and logistical hubs. The devastation is immediate hangars explode into fireballs, runways are left cratered, and fuel depots ignite, blanketing the sky in thick smoke. The final wave of the attack is directed at the U.S. Pacific Fleet. With over 200 ships and 150,000 personnel, it is America's dominant force in the region. China unleashes DF-21D and DF-26 carrier killer missiles to cripple aircraft carriers, destroyers, and logistical support vessels. The USS Shiloh takes a direct hit, and several destroyers are severely damaged or lost. The Pacific Fleet scrambles to responding missiles, overwhelms even the most advanced defenses. Despite the cyber attacks, U.S. missile warning satellites detect the launches almost instantly. President Donald Trump is briefed within minutes. The U.S. activates its missile defenses. Alaska and California's ground-based interceptors, interceptors to the response is swift, but a question lingers. Are these conventional strikes, or is China escalating nuclear war? Satellite data suggests the missile at civilian centers. The U.S. holds back its nuclear deterrent. Instead, the priority is survival, evacuating key personnel, and reinforcing defenses before China launches its next strike. As the first wave of missiles slams into Japan and South Korea, the missile defense systems intercept many, but not all. Okinawa, home to the largest U.S. airbase in Japan, is hit hard. Kadena Air Base is left in ruins, with vital refueling aircraft destroyed, limiting America's ability to sustain long-range operations. The U.S. fleet takes severe losses. While many ships evade or shoot down incoming missiles, several cruisers and destroyers suffer catastrophic hits. The USS Hopper is lost. Even Hawaii is not spared. Though U.S. missile defenses hold the line against most hypersonic strikes, a few slip through, damaging key naval assets. However, America's submarine fleet remains untouched. Forewarned, they have already vanished beneath the waves, awaiting orders for a counterstrike. She knows he cannot destroy the U.S. military outright, but he has bought himself time. The Pacific Fleet is weakened, and American cyber defenses are still struggling to recover. But at what cost? The missile attacks have dragged Japan and South Korea into the war, committing two of the world's strongest militaries against him. And now, Taiwan is bracing for the next phase. For 24 hours, China has battered Taiwan with missile strikes, but despite the bombardment, the island refuses to break. Taiwan's air defense systems, Patriot missiles, Skybow interceptors, are holding firm. China's aerial dominance is not guaranteed. She orders the missile strikes to halt. He cannot risk hitting his own forces once the invasion begins. But he faces a problem. Taiwan has spent decades preparing for this very moment. The island's geography is its greatest shield. Steep cliffs guard the east, while the shallow western coastline is fortified with mines, barbed wire, and anti-ship defenses. Taiwan's ports, critical for a Chinese landing force, are rigged with explosives. If the invasion falters, the Taiwanese military is ready to collapse key roads and tunnels, forcing Chinese forces into brutal urban warfare. President Lai Ching-te has been ready for months. He knows a direct defense of the coastline will be difficult, but he does not intend to fight conventionally. Instead, he prepares Taiwan for a war of attrition, where China's numerical advantage will mean little against an enemy willing to bleed them dry. The United States is ready to strike back. The Pentagon finalizes its counter-offensive, but before launching its military response, Trump delivers a devastating economic blow. With the support of allies, the U.S. enacts sweeping sanctions, cutting China off from critical imports, especially oil. Overnight, Beijing finds itself facing not just military resistance, but economic strangulation. She has won the first battle, but the war is only beginning. China imports millions of barrels of oil annually, but 81% of its supply comes from countries like Saudi Arabia, which maintain close ties with the United States. With diplomatic pressure and growing concerns about Chinese expansion, President Trump successfully negotiates to restrict most of China's oil imports. While Russia continues to buy Beijing, it cannot really compensate for the massive, especially its own economic ongoing war. Putin cannot afford to jeopardize broad Xi Jinping's war effort. This leaves China in a precarious position. Without a steady oil supply, it faces a countdown. Xi must secure victory against the U.S. or his military will be critically weakened. With sanctions tightening and trade routes disrupted, Trump turns to NATO allies. China has directly attacked U.S. territories and military bases overseas, giving America the justification to invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter. This clause states that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. China's aggression effectively mobilizes most of Europe against it. The most Trump coordinating with NATO leaders, preparing a unified response. A coalition of 31 nations, led by the U.S., forms a massive counteroffensive. The key battleground is the Taiwan Strait. Xi's strategy of overwhelming Taiwan with missile barrages and amphibious landings is proving costly. Each attempt to storm Taiwanese beaches is met with fierce resistance, and even when Chinese forces manage to land, they are bogged down in brutal urban warfare. Meanwhile, the U.S. spearheads an international naval force. Aircraft carriers from the U.S., the U.K.'s HMS Queen Elizabeth, and Japan's fleet of 36 destroyers move toward Taiwan. Canada commits half of its naval forces, while Australia and the Philippines provide additional support, while other countries in Asia are just on standby, thinking what to do in this situation. South Korea, wary of North Korea, keeps its military on high alert, but does not fully commit to the naval battle. The coalition's strategy is clear: trap China's forces in Taiwan and sever their supply lines. The situation worsens for Xi. His forces are entrenched in Taiwan but struggling. Every gain is met with counterattacks, destroyed infrastructure, and logistical nightmares. Taiwanese defenders strategically collapse roads and tunnels, forcing Chinese troops into difficult terrain. At the same time, the Allied fleet reaches the Taiwan Strait. Despite China's naval supremacy in sheer numbers, it lacks the firepower to counter the combined might of the U.S. and its allies. Though Xi's initial missile barrages destroyed a number of U.S. destroyers, America still has 68 operational warships, nearly 20 more than China. Moreover, China's smaller corvettes and patrol boats are no match for the heavily armed Allied fleet. Then comes America's trump card, the Rapid Dragon missile system. U.S. military cargo planes, previously seen as non-threats, unleash pallets of long-range AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles. These attacks overwhelm China's missile defenses, striking warships and disrupting air bases used to launch fighter jets. With China's defenses preoccupied, precision-guided strikes eliminate key targets, shifting momentum to the Allied forces. Xi has lost critical control over Taiwan's coastal regions. Though some Chinese troops remain on the island, their reinforcements are cut off. The Allied Navy dominates the strait, while constant missile strikes devastate Chinese air bases in Longtian, Zhangzhou, and Huyan. This cripples China's air power, leaving it vulnerable to U.S. and NATO aerial assaults. The U.S. deploys 8 aircraft carriers, each carrying up to 75 fighters, bolstering Allied air superiority. Taiwan's own fleet of upgraded F-16s, while technologically inferior to China's J-20s, has succeeded in delaying air dominance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Now, with NATO and the U.S. in full force, China's advance is being pushed back toward the mainland. As the tide turns, China's submarines strike back. Their elite Shang-class nuclear submarines managed to sink 2 American aircraft carriers, a significant blow. However, the U.S. responds in kind. Though China has more submarines, American crews are better trained and equipped. The U.S. systematically eliminates China's naval assets, including both of its aircraft carriers, neutralizing its ability to sustain air operations. Facing heavy losses, Xi recalls what remains of China's fleet, anticipating an invasion of the mainland. His forces in Taiwan are stranded and slowly being eliminated. With Allied troops now landing in Taiwan, Chinese forces find themselves trapped in a pincer movement, attacked from the beaches and the urban strongholds they failed to fully capture. Xi is faced with a desperate question. Should he use nuclear weapons? China possesses around 500 nuclear warheads and intercontinental ballistic missiles, or the ICBMs capable of reaching the United States. The DU-41, with a 7,500-mile range, could strike deep into U.S. territory. But Xi hesitates. He knows that launching nukes would guarantee a retaliatory strike from the U.S.-America's nuclear triad. Land-based Minuteman III ICBMs, submarine-launched missiles, and aerial bombers can wipe out China's major cities and military infrastructure. Realizing the war is unwinnable, China is forced to negotiate peace. The coalition's overwhelming firepower, combined with economic sanctions, has crippled its ability to continue fighting. Xi's miscalculations cost China dearly. The dream of a quick victory turned into a prolonged, devastating conflict that left his military shattered. Though the U.S. emerges victorious, it comes at a cost. The American Navy suffers heavy losses, and it will take years to rebuild its war capabilities. Alongside NATO, the U.S. enforces long-term military restrictions on China, reshaping the balance of power in the Pacific. The war serves as a stark lesson. America's strength lies not just in its own military power, but in its alliances. The rapid coordination of NATO, Japan, and other allies showcases the effectiveness of collective defense. Any nation considering a future conflict with the U.S. is now on notice. Of course, This is just one possible scenario. Would China allow itself to be backed into such a dire position? Could the US truly rally all its allies in time? What alternative strategies might China employ to counteract this overwhelming force? Leave a comment down below and don't forget to subscribe.
Day 1. It's the dead of night over the East China Sea. For several days now, Xi Jinping has been moving his fleet of 6 Shang-class Type 93 submarines into position. Each is just over 360 feet long and is capable of firing cruise missiles at naval and terrestrial targets. Those submarines are converging in the East China Sea with one target in mind, the Okinawa Naval Base. The base, which the United States has established with Japan to protect both its own military ambitions and further its trilateral relationship with Japan and South Korea, is home to around 3,000 active troops. It's the largest American Chinese. The Type 93 submarines launch their cruise missiles, and YJ-18 supersonic cruise missiles fly into the sky. Guidance systems pointing to America's Okinawa submarines also deploy west of the loadouts. YJ-82 anti-time. China's bombers take off from its Fujian aircraft carrier. They speed toward Okinawa, avoiding air defense systems, thanks to the havoc being wreaked by the Type 93 submarines. Most managed to deliver their payloads. In a matter of hours, China's sneak attack destroyed the majority of the U.S. military presence in Japan. War is official. Xi Jinping has struck the first blow. Day 2. President Joe Biden is in a state of incredulous shock. China's movements had been no secret to him. He knew the country was amassing some of its submarines in the East China Sea and had received reports about the Fujian aircraft carrier in the area. But he and his intelligence officials believed that Japan would be the target. Technically, it was, but he hadn't anticipated that China's attack would focus so heavily on America's Okinawa bases. This wasn't solely an attack on Japan. In fact, Japan was just collateral damage to China in their goal of inflicting a devastating blow on the United States. After a day filled with press briefings and reports from his military officials, Biden knew that he had an ace up his sleeve that Xi Jinping hadn't considered. Article 5 of the NATO Founding Treaty. Article 5 states that if any member of NATO is the victim of an armed attack, every other member of the alliance will consider this attack as an act of violence committed against all of its members. In response, they will take actions they deem necessary to assist the NATO ally that's been attacked. It's a collective defense initiative designed to ward off any countries that are foolish enough to start a war with a NATO member. Today, engaged in one of those consultations with the leaders of NATO's other 30 member countries. He makes his case. The United States is the strongest member nation. Leaving it to fight a war against China alone would significantly weaken the U.S., hurting NATO in the process. NATO's members agree. They see through any argument that Xi makes about his attack intended to target Japan, and they reach a consensus. An attack on the United States is an attack on all other 30 members. Day 3. Xi Jinping receives word about the NATO consensus. He anticipated this. He knew that the U.S. would go running to its allies, and this consensus just proves what he's always said. NATO is nothing more than a puppet of the U.S. No matter. The majority of NATO's members simply aren't strong enough to pose a threat to China's rapidly growing army. Yes, the UK, France, and Germany can all cause problems. Same goes for Poland, which has established one of Europe's strongest militaries over the last decade or so. But Xi also knows that many of those NATO members, especially those in Europe, are at a distinct disadvantage. War is already raging in Ukraine, with several NATO members having already committed billions of dollars, as well as huge amounts of equipment, to the Ukrainian war effort. Russia is still a problem for those European members. If they withdraw support for Ukraine, they essentially hand the war over to Putin, expanding Russian influence in Europe. Poland can't afford that. No European country can. Even if NATO dedicates troops to help the US, it won't be able to offer its full support. And even if it could, most NATO nations have a really rough time with China, so it could attack its western borders. Moving through Russia isn't an option for obvious reasons, and it's unlikely that the string of nations that make up the Middle East are going to cooperate and allow NATO troops through, especially Iran. If NATO were to try to attack by making its way through Asia, it would need to start wars with the likes of Iran and Russia directly. Not an option. So any attack would be naval and would have to come from America's western borders or be executed by sailing around Africa, past India, and up to China, giving Xi plenty of time to launch counterattacks. While NATO develops a plan, Xi has more attacks to launch. Next on the agenda are South Korea's 73 American bases and what